Hello, BookTube. An imaginary BookTube friend of mine sent me an email that was a two-pronged attack. The first prong was, I bet you're such a soy boy cuck that you couldn't put together a 100 biography recommendation video. And the second prong was, here's a cute picture of a dog. And between the two things, it worked. So I took the several months necessary to research and prepare this video, and now I have for you 100 biography recommendations. It's my favorite genre of reading. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I love it. So this list could have been 1,000 recommendations, but I'm using a few parameters here that I thought I'd touch on first before we get started. One is I am squishing things. So if an author has a multi-volume life of someone, I'm treating that as one life. And occasionally it will come up in the course of this video that an author who wrote a multi-volume life of somebody also wrote a one-volume abridgment. And sometimes the one-volume abridgment is very good. So I'll try to note that if such is the case. Another stipulation here, it should be obvious from a list like this. It should be obvious if you have a working brain in your head. I very much don't disavow the so-called great man theory of history. For a long time, and probably it's transmogrified now into just the school of resentment, but for a long time, there was a faddish movement about that people don't do anything to affect the course of nations or events, that it's just bland, impersonal, sociological forces. I didn't know what to make of that at the time. It's obviously false. So, that animates a lot of these choices here. Definitely, this is you will not find, for instance, Jonathan Spence's The Death of the Widow Wang. It's a very good book, but you won't find it here. Another little qualification is I have a sweet tooth for authorized biographies, where so-and-so's estate, whoever owns the papers, whoever has access to the primary material, whoever has a fleet of lawyers, will pick someone to write a biography that is authorized by their estate. And every once in a while, that estate will say to the person they pick, look, we picked you because of your publication history. Not any other reason. So we're not even going to pay attention to what you do. Here are all, our vetting of your publication history shows that you are fair. So you're not coming into this with an axe to grind. So here are all the documents. Good luck. You'll get armed premature when it's all over, and that's it. For every one estate that does that, there'll be 20 estates that say, we'd really like it if you toe the party line. We'd really like it if you trade on your professional integrity in order to do a job that we'll approve of. So there aren't many official biographies on this list. There aren't many. I have a sweet tooth for them, but I recognize them for the popular characterization as being both a graveyard of where reading interest goes to die, because they're usually vetted 6 ways from Sunday, so they're very boring to read, and also that they are inherently untrustworthy because they're being written with they're being censored with an agenda. I recognize both of those, so I'm going to try not to do that. There are a couple on this list. We're going to start off and just plow through to the end. The first one we'll start off with is a sport biography. This is Jonathan Egg's book, Muhammad Ali, his biography, Ali. A great big thing that manages to sidestep a lot of the hagiography about this figure, and also point out the negative stuff. I myself think that it makes Ali's greatness stand out all the brighter when a biographer does that. Also, there's a lot less, there's almost none in this book of the attitude that tends to fill Ali biographies of, hey, remember where we were then? Wasn't it great to have hair? That sort of thing. Instead, this is looking at him. This is the first book I've read on him that really starts to treat him as a historical figure. Then we'll move on to Mark Leopold. I've praised this book before on this channel, but I'm making this video as if you had never seen a video of mine before. This is his biography of Idi Amin, but it's also his inquiry into how we know anything about Idi Amin. It's his inquiry into historiography. It's his inquiry into where do any of these rumors come from. If you know anything about Idi Amin, for instance, if you don't know anything about Idi Amin, and you know something about him, you know cannibalism. let's be honest, that's probably the only thing you've ever heard about this figure. How did you hear that? And how did that start getting brooded around? So this book works on 2 levels. Amin is a horrifying person to spend time with on the page. We're going to encounter a few of those things in this list. But also, watching Leopold figure out what it is that he knows and how he knows it is wonderful. He does a wonderful job of narrating that. Then we have the great John Eliot Gardner, who wrote a book called Bach, Music in the Castle of Heaven. This is a Bach biography. He's had no shortage of them since he was alive. But I like this one the most. The one caveat I would offer with this is that it is, thanks to its author, incredibly musically literate. So if you're not, there are going to be parts of this that might sail past you. If, for instance, you don't know musical notation, for instance, that might be a bit of a problem. Not much of one, though. And oh my, the author makes up for that with how passionately he writes about the music. Wonderful. Then we'll move on to Roland Bainton. This is an oldie but a goodie. That's actually another stipulation of this list, is that I stuck to things in the 20th century or the 21st century. There have been great biographies written in the 20 centuries before the 20th century, but I tried to stay away from them. This could be a much, much longer list. I don't have Tacitus's Agricola, for instance. I don't have Boswell's Life of Johnson, where that Macaulay said that Boswell is the first of biographers and there is no second. And a whole bunch of other things. I didn't include any of those things, Washington Irving's biography of George Washington, or a million others. But there are a lot of... I left those things out just to keep these recent. But even so, there are a ton of omissions on this list. A ton of them. This list could easily be 10 times longer. But here we have Roland Bainton. This is Here I Stand, his biography of Martin Luther, the pig. Which is wonderful reading. Bainton is fantastic. If you have never read him and find him at a used book sale or whatever, or a library, he's terrific to read. And his biography of Martin Luther is the best thing he ever did. Then we have James Knowlson. This is a biography of Samuel Beckett, Damned to Fame. And it illustrates a point that I think will be obvious throughout this list, which is that I don't have to like these people in order to recommend their biographies. I don't have to like someone in order to read a biography and really like it. And I don't particularly like Beckett. I know that he's a towering figure in Irish literature, and I feel like I should know him better. I don't particularly like him. It's been my lot in life that the 2 of the biggest literary figures in Irish literature in the 20th century, Beckett and Joyce, I don't like either one of them. But there are great biographies of them, and I've read, naturally, because I don't particularly like Beckett, I've tried to like him. And the way I always try to like an author is to read biographies. So I've read a lot, and this is, I read this recently, just a few years ago, and thought it was fantastic. Then we have another musical figure, another classical musical figure. This is another example, perfect example of how an odious person can make for a great biography. This is Jan Swafford's biography of Beethoven, Anguish and Triumph. Many, many Beethoven biographies out there, but I love this one the most. Oh my. Such a sweeping thing. Then we have something we've seen on this channel before. We've seen a lot of these things on this channel before. This is Robert Utley. Wonderful guy, wonderful raconteur, and a wonderful storyteller on the page. You really can't go wrong with anything that he wrote. And he wrote a biography of Billy the Kid that meticulously reconstructs everything that we can know about the young man who we know as Billy the Kid. It meticulously reconstructs everything, gives it the attention that it deserves. Utley is a fantastic storyteller, so the details don't swamp the narrative. Boy, oh boy, though, reading him do this, he's one of those authors I wish I could just reach into the past and just get him writing forever. What I wouldn't give for him to have put this kind of biographical approach to the biography of a U.S. president. Okay, then we have Marie Arana. This is her biography of Simon Bolivar. Really gives you a sense of the proportions here, of the importance of this figure. Full of colorful anecdote. Again, when it comes to Simon Bolivar, a lot of people will only know the name. They won't know any details. They won't know why he was so important. And there was a little spate of biographies about 10 years ago, and this was the best of them. Then we have a little bit of a sad thing. We lost an author. This is David Scows' book, Something in the Blood. His, let's just say, unusual biography of Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. This is It's really thought-provoking. I'm not 100% sure how much you will agree with some of the points that Skal makes, but the reason that's on this list is because, yes, Skal has a hypothesis to put forward, but he's also a terrific narrator of the events of Stoker's life that don't have anything to do with his hypothesis. He's a terrific narrator of the whole story. So if you're ever interested, if like me you've read Dracula more times than you can count, you might want to read the story of the man. There have been a number of Bram Stoker biographies, none better than this. Then we have Serge Bramley. This is his biography of Leonardo da Vinci. Again, there have been a huge number of biographies of this figure. A lot of you will know Walter Isaacson's biography, which is really, really good and beautifully illustrated. But for me, when it comes to Leonardo, you really want, since he's been biographied so many times, you really want the thinking of the biographer. That is, you want that to be the lure, and that is on display in this book more than in any other biography of Leonardo that I've read. We have a huge thing. This is a thing that I tried to work against in this list. Group biographies. I tried to work against them. They're only on here a couple of times. This is just too good not to recommend to you. This is Juliet Barker's book, The Brontes, about the Bronte sisters and Branwell, and the father and the mother and the grandfather. This is group biography done just about as well as it can be done. It's amazingly readable. It's huge. It's 1,000 pages long, and amazingly detailed. To really, really give you a sense. I know it's a bit heretical, but I think the Brontes would fall in the category for me of authors that I like to read about more than I like to read. I know that's heretical when you've got Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights on the table, but nevertheless. Then we have this is a smush. This is Leslie Marchand. This is his biography of Lord Byron. He did a multi-volume biography of Byron, and then he did a one-volume, and either one will work. I'm not recommending the smushes just because they're easy enough to put on a list. The approach that I would take, if you are interested in the subject, if you're interested in Byron, and unlike some of the other figures on this list, you don't have to start interested in Byron to get interested in him pretty quickly. He had a fascinating life. But if you're interested, and you wonder whether or not Marchand is going to get along with you on the page, then the one-volume smush would be a volume's read. And if you fall in love with it, well, you can read the unabridged version. But Byron has had 1 million biographies, and most of them, most of them are really, really bad. And let's just put it that way. I'm always reminded of that line from The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, where Mrs. Muir brings her manuscript to her publisher, and there's a louche, old, cynical, best-selling author in the lobby, and he sees her with a manuscript, and he notices right away that she's a woman, so he thinks, is it a book of dreams, or maybe another life of Byron? Yeah, but not here. This is first-rate stuff. All right, let's move on here to Robert Massey, the great Robert Massey. He wrote a biography of Peter the Great that is not on this list, but he also wrote much later in life, a biography of Catherine the Great that I couldn't leave off. He's a good example. There are a number of examples on this list of how I could double and triple the size of this thing. I mean, I tried to give only one book per author, but there are, in the last 150 years, there have been many writers who were professional biographers. They wrote many books, and many of them were really good. Robert Massey's a perfect example. If I wanted to double the length of this list, I would have included his biography of Peter the Great. But his book on Catherine the Great is fantastic. Again, it's very easy to write a cheap biography of this person, but instead, he gives us a Catherine who is a working ruler. He gives us the day-to-day, the grotty side, as we hear in 6 Degrees of Separation. And that is often neglected in favor of the sensationalistic stories in other biographies. So this is the one to get. Your library will have it. Your library book sale might have it. Then we have Ronald Hutton. I believe he's entirely out of print. He's terrific. Very acidic at times, but a terrific writer. This is his biography of Charles II, the so-called Merry Monarch. One of a number of British monarchs on this list. Monarchs just in general are on this list. Charles has had a number of biographies, also a number of really good biographies. Again, I tried not to duplicate subject matter, and I tried not to duplicate author. Roland Baton is a good example. Almost everybody that's going to be on this list has written another biography. But his book on Charles II is the best biography of Charles II. We're really due for another one. It's been quite some time. It'd be nice if we got a long, serious history of Charles II and his reign. Then we have the writer John Gardner, who was also a teacher and who wrote a biography of Geoffrey Chaucer that was famously pilloried by critics, including one particular critic who trotted it out to the back of the barn and shot it in the head. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Those critics notwithstanding, this critic is telling you, you will love this book. You will love the passion of it. You'll love the way it's written. One of the best written biographies on this list. And so there. So there to carping critics. Then we'll see next here something that we've just recently seen on this channel. This is Brad Gooch's biography of the great poet Frank O'Hara, city poet. Shows you the youth, the education right across the river, the early poems, the work of an almost universally beloved figure. Almost universally beloved. A man who, in addition to everything else, had to put his enormous intellect and vivacity to work in trying to live his life without lying about it, trying to live as a gay man. It's hard enough in the 21st century. He had faced much greater obstacles in his own time. Gooch covers every aspect. This is a big book, a big, satisfyingly big book. Also, it's another thread that runs throughout this list. There are a lot of literary biographies on here. I briefly thought about just doing 100 recommendations of writer biographies, and I could easily do that without duplicating any of these for another video. I thought about writer biographies, ruler biographies, but instead I mushed them all together. Writer biographies are, of course, an irresistible temptation to biographers because they sit around all day. Most of them do. Byron didn't, but they sit around all day writing, and they never throw anything away. Byron did, but most of them don't. So not only do you get a life that's easy to chronicle, but you get tons of primary information. I resisted for a long time writer biographies. I thought, why not just read the works? And then I realized what a dumb, reductivist thing that is to say. So now I like both the works and the authors. This next one is Elaine Showalter, the great Elaine Showalter. This is the Civil Wars of Julia Ward Howe. Again, as with so many figures on this list, if you aren't familiar with this figure, you will only be familiar with this figure from one thing, for the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But there's a lot more going on here. Herself and also her family. This is a wonderful evocation of all of that. Really, really three-dimensional. You will feel you know the author by the end of the book. Then this next one I have recommended many, many times before. I couldn't leave it off this list. I doubt I could ever leave it off a list like this. This is Stacy Schiff's biography of Cleopatra. Well-trod ground, no new sources. There's nothing new from Cleopatra, so I had my doubts about this. But it's fantastic. Just fantastic. In terms of readability, in terms of the real sense of an author absorbing a bunch of stuff from Plutarch, a bunch of details from Plutarch or wherever, and then going for a long walk or going to a coffee shop and sitting with it for a while. That's a wonderful feeling. Very much not the feeling of dashing stuff off of index cards. Those of you who have read this, especially those of you who are skeptical about reading A Life of Cleopatra and enjoying it, I feel certain that if you've read this, you were converted, and you understand why people sing this book's praises. I strongly recommend it. All of these things are strong recommendations. Then we have Natalie Dykstra, who's coming out with a new biography this year. This is her book of Clover Adams, the wife of Henry Adams. And, if you read A Life of Henry Adams, you will know about Clover Adams at least a bit. But the genius of Natalie Dykstra's book is that she writes as if Henry Adams didn't exist. He's in here. He's all over this book. But she writes as if he didn't exist. She certainly writes as if you don't need his permission to be interested in Clover Adams. And it's wonderful. It was so... I was hoping that it would be really good. It was so much better than I expected. Just a wonderful, wonderful book. Okay, then we have Michael Schumann. Some of the books on this list are going on very little primary information that's actually reliable. And there, it's just a question of what you're going to do with it. How are you going to work those sources? And this really surprised me. This is his biography of Confucius. And it's terrific. It's absolutely terrific on every page, every chapter, everything that we can surmise, everything that we can reconstruct about this figure. I went in here totally skeptical and was blown away. It's not a long book. I strongly recommend it. This next one is very long. It's 1,000 pages. It's by J.C. Beaglehole. This is his epic biography of Captain Cook. From his earliest beginnings as, a pock-faced teenager working behind a counter and seeing the ships go out to sea and wondering if he'd ever maybe crew on one of them, having no idea that he would become incredibly famous in his day and afterwards. Many Cook biographies, many good little books on Cook. He has spawned a mini industry in the last 200 years of people who strap on a sailing vessel and try to recreate his passages, that sort of thing. But this is a full-dress biography, and there's never been anything to even come close to it. So if you're interested in the subject, this should be where you start and stop. Then a much more recent book. This is Dermot McCullough. This is his big biography of Thomas Cromwell, the legal fixer and leg breaker for Henry VIII, who is the narrative focal point of Hilary Mantel's trilogy of books, starting with Wolf Hall. And in the Wolf Hall books, Hilary Mantel makes Thomas Cromwell into a man for all men, a perfect man, a proto-modern man, an enlightened figure, a likable figure, a perfect figure, pretty much a perfect figure. Violent, sure, but always in the cause of good. And it's important to remember that Cromwell wasn't that way. He wasn't that way. And this is not historical guesswork. He was, in fact, a brute, a leg breaker. And McCullough does not forget that. This is a sympathetic biography, but when Cromwell does something wrong, or even ill-advised, McCullough is right there. And the amazing thing about this, considering that it's 700 pages long, is how readable it is on each individual page. McCullough never slackens in his narrative interest. There's never a part of the book that you feel like he's just ice skating along. Never. Then we have another figure who spawned a huge number of biographies. Cromwell hasn't had that many. He had one a century ago that was terrific, and then he had McCullough's. This figure has spawned a shelf, a whole library of biographies. I, again, picked one that was one volume. I tried to pick one that was written by someone who was not a felon, who didn't have an axe to grind, didn't have a political agenda, because political figures always bring that out. You get, if you get a biography of a political figure by another political figure, you can almost always dispense with it. It's almost always just a campaign ad under a different guise. Could mention Boris Johnson here, but a bunch of other people too. But this, I think, is the best one-volume biography of this figure. This is Robert Dallek's biography of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was one of the greatest American presidents. Well, no matter what you think of him, he was our president during World War II. He was the president who rescued the country from the Great Depression. Died in office, the whole 9 yards. This is Dalek does a great job. It's a big book, but it's not as big as it could be. And the paperback has a wonderful blurb. Then we have something that straddles the borderline here. I'm hoping that by now on this channel I have outlasted the small cadre of commenters the dude bro commenters who would say, well, aren't all biographies fiction, dude? I mean, isn't it all fiction? Isn't everything fiction, dude? Buy my brain pills. I'm hoping that I've outlasted them and that they don't watch this channel anymore. I hope they know that they don't have a sympathetic ear. Nevertheless, some biographies skirt closer to the line of narrative fiction than others, and this would be one of them. This is Irving Stone, and this is his book, Clarence Darrow for the Defense, about the greatest lawyer since Cicero, which one small-town paper started calling Clarence Darrow, and he was quick to start echoing that, as he would be too, I guess. I don't think, Stone never doubts it for a minute, I don't think that Darrow himself was responsible for that small-town paper calling him that. I don't think he was. He could have been. But nevertheless, he was a brilliant courtroom orator, a brilliant writer, and led a fascinating life. This book is the best book that's ever been written about him. And it is, like a couple of other books on this list, it employs fictional devices. Let's put it that way. This next one is Janet Brown. This is a squish. She wrote a multi-volume biography of this figure. She also wrote a one-volume abridgment. She's great on this figure. So if you find if you find a single volume of the multi-volume, you're going to enjoy it either way. And the figure, of course, is Charles Darwin, who wrote the most important book in the history of the human race that was written by a single person. This is everything. This is her multi-volume, her just in general, her life of Darwin, however you want to put it, whether you want to get the multiple volumes or not. It goes at every detail, everything that we know about Darwin, everything that we know about his family, everything that we know in this particular volume about his voyages around the world, his voyages with the Beagle, where he got to see a whole bunch of things that started getting him thinking, why would this be true? Why would this look the way it does? Why would this look so similar to something on the other side of the world? What's going on here? Sometimes all it takes is the right set of perceptions in the right location. And there have been many, many biographies of Darwin, but Brown gets him right. She understands it perfectly. Then we have, I put this on here even though it's a letter collection. It's close to, it's the closest we'll ever get to a biography of this figure. The biographer in question here is Leonard Marcus, and here he put together a bunch of letters with a whole bunch of bridging material, so you're not missing much. And there's a long biography about the figure's early life, so you're not missing much. I thought I could stretch a point and put this on here. This is Dear Genius. The letters of Ursula Nordstrom, who forever and ever was the most influential children's book editor in the country, in the world, and lived a life in letters. This is the point that I often make on this channel that goes right past those of you who were born in the 20th century. It was once upon a time you sat at your desk and you did your correspondence and mailed them off. And those are physical objects out in the world. If somebody wanted to put those together, keep them, put a rubber band around them, and put them in a hope chest, they could. In which case you could find them 100 years later, 200 years later. She lived her life in letters, and Marcus does a great job of selecting them and a great job of writing bridging material, so it's close enough. It's close enough. Then we have a figure, this next figure, no offense to the book that I'm nominating here, I do recommend it, but I don't think that this figure has ever been done full biographical justice. Talk about a fascinating life. You would have to go down deep into the weeds, and I've read every biography of this figure, and I've never seen a biographer do that. Not to the extent that I know it can be done. So I guess I'm still waiting. That's the nice thing about biographies, is that you're always waiting for someone else to write one. This is by Paula Backscheider, and this is her biography of Daniel Defoe, who, again, if you only know this figure, you'll know him from, one book, maybe two books. You have no sense of what his life was like. His life was incredible. This book does a very good job. There's also one other, could have gone on this list, but I tried not to duplicate subject matters. So that other terrific DeVoe biography could go on another list. but it's, if you don't know about this figure, you really should learn about him, because he is an example. They aren't all over this list, but quite a few of them. He's a perfect example where he could have written not a word. You don't need to think of it as a writer's life. He could have written not a word, or none of his writing could have survived. His life would still be fascinating. Then we have a recent acquisition here, but I'd already read it in a different format. This is Julian Jackson's biography of Charles de Gaulle, A Certain Idea of France. Managed to capture one of the most remarkable figures of the 20th century. Someone who, elected officials, non-elected officials, public officials, they all like to daydream that they embody their nation. They're almost always wrong. They're almost always obviously wrong, right? The person who's going to rule the United States for the next 25 years firmly believes that about himself. And he couldn't be further from the truth. He literally craps on a gold toilet. De Gaulle, you could say that it was true about FDR. You could say it's true about a couple of other figures on this list. De Gaulle did do that. He very much did do that. It made him insufferable. But it also made him great. I could easily picture a day coming where somebody writes a biography called Charles de Gaulle the Great. I could easily picture that. Jackson is not starstruck by this figure, and that makes this book just endlessly readable. Oh my! Especially since, like a lot of other figures on this list, de Gaulle started having a noteworthy life right away, almost from the cradle. So by the time he's 20, he's doing things that you could write a biography about, even if you didn't know anything else about him. Same thing with Churchill, for instance. All right, same thing if you believe him. I don't. For our next figure, this is Charles Dickens, and this is the big biography by Peter Ackroyd. Many, many, many Dickens biographies, but Ackroyd's really does it for me. I think mainly the saving grace is that Ackroyd also was a hack writer. in the sense that he never turned down a deadline, that he's always working, that he'll write about anything, that he's a very what are you doing, baby? A very charismatic writer on the page. Not too deep, not too shallow, just right. I think there's some resonance there with his biography of Dickens. I think that's what makes it work for me. I've read a lot of Dickens biographies, but this one works the most. Then we have something fairly recently. I should point out for those of you who are inevitably going to ask that I have met only a couple of the subjects of the biographies on this list, and only two of them did I not only meet but actually get a little friendly with. One of the only people in the history of humanity to ever make me drink hard liquor. I prefer wine to something that tastes and smells like gasoline. But just to point that out, I am not pointing that out in terms of Dickens. I'm not pointing it out in terms of Dennis Diderot either. Although I am going to, I should have timed that differently. This is Diderot and the Art of Thinking Freely, and there were a couple of Diderot biographies just recently, and a biographer on this list for someone else also wrote a great biography of Diderot. But this is fairly recent. This is a 21st century production, and wonderful, sparkling. I think you hurt Diderot if you give him a 900-page biography. I think you hurt him if you do that, and this book knows that and doesn't. And I believe there's a very good blurb on the paperback. All right, then we have a little bit of an odd choice here, but it's stuck with me. All these years it's stuck with me. This is by Jonathan Dimbleby, and this is his biography of his father, Richard Dimbleby, who was a great newsman. Just a great newsman. And Dimbleby is great in that he strikes a perfect balance between reporting and affection for his father, but he also, which is, for instance, not an easy thing to do, but he also captures the world of Fleet Street over a 30-year span in a wonderful way, a way that I've seldom seen equaled even in books that are about that as a subject, and not about Dimbleby at all. So I don't know how available it is, but it's stuck with me. It's stuck with me. I really got the impression all throughout the book that Jonathan Dimbleby was realizing throughout while he was writing it that the one thing the old man would hate is hagiography. The one thing he would hate is if I was pulling punches because he's related to me. What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't you want to see your fans? Is that it? What are you doing? All right, go crazy. All right, this next one is a squish. This author wrote multiple volumes on this subject. There is a one volume that I would almost recommend because this subject is depressing to spend a lot of time with. This is Joseph Frank's multi-volume biography of Dostoevsky. A great biographical undertaking of the 20th century. The one volume is also very good, so it's totally up to you how interested you are in how miserable Dostoevsky was. Is he more miserable in volume 1 than in volume 2? Then we have another relatively recent production. This is these picks of mine on this list are 20th century and 21st century so far. And because I love biography and because I'm good at twisting the arms of editors, I've reviewed a lot of the 21st century ones. I've reviewed some of the 20th century ones, but usually not under my own name. So this is something you might have heard me talk about before. This is David Blight's biography of Frederick Douglass, who here has a good deal of competition when it comes to writing biographies of Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass wrote 3 of them. But nevertheless, that makes a goldmine of primary information, and this book does a great job with it. Just a great job with it, and also is endlessly readable. It's endlessly interesting to turn the pages. You're not just feeling like you're learning. You're not just feeling like you're learning, much as I'm certainly no enemy of learning. I'm no enemy of books that teach you things. But if you're in a biography only for the learning, you're in the wrong biography. That's the simplest way to put it. Then we have James Wynne. This is his book, John Dryden and His World. An oversized paperback, an oversized hardcover, a very generous look at John Dryden. Really the best book, the best biography of Dryden that's ever been done. And the And His World part is a strong aspect of this book. That some biographies stint, and this one doesn't, and that's good because Dryden was deeply involved in his world, and is a fascinating figure. Again, if you've only heard of Dryden, then you haven't if you haven't studied the details of his life, you'll have no idea how fascinating it is. He's a lot like Defoe in that regard. And Wynne makes it very accessible. Then this is a kind of a squish, kind of, sort of. This is Edward Mendelsohn, and this is his 2 books, really, early Auden and later Auden. They work really well together. You might think, well, if that's true, I mean, what's the only commonality between young Auden and older Auden? That's 50 cigarettes a day. That's the only continuity between the two of them. He literally never stopped smoking. Literally never, not in meals, not at night. His body forced himself to go unconscious. Otherwise, he was smoking. Never while writing, never while lecturing, never anywhere, never even in hospital. So there's no ability to get a picture of him that doesn't. but this is Mendelssohn studying what he was like when he broke out, and then what he was like when he was gigantic, leather-faced literary establishment. But there's enough middle ground so that this will work. You can get this as 1 ebook, I believe, maybe even 1 book. You can also get the separate books. Auden's had a lot of biographies, but I love the way Mendelssohn thinks about him. That's key. Then we have this was the only cover I could find for this thing. It's one of those wretched print-on-demand type things that happened once upon a time. This is Arthur Kahn's biography of Julius Caesar, The Education of Julius Caesar. Once again, to put it mildly, Julius Caesar has had a number of biographies, and a number of them have been quite good. I could have put more of them on this list, but I chose this one because it's my favorite. I like it the most. It's not overly long. It's not padded at all. It feels like a wonderful reading experience. Baby, Frida, come off there. What is the matter, little girl? Sorry, she was about to fall down a hole. A very Bassethound thing to do. Sorry, I'm hoping that she will not distract for the whole of this video. Then we have another monarch biography. I had to put this on here. It is an official biography. It is an authorized biography, and it's also not a biography of a monarch that a lot of people would think doesn't deserve one. There are a couple of those on this list, but he's a favorite of mine. And these are recommendations, right? I'm not just saying these are the best biographies ever written. This is Philip Magnus. This is his biography of King Edward VII, the successor to Queen Victoria. It's a nice, hefty-sized book. It is punctilious in the way that authorized biographies are, so you get every speech, you get every public gathering. But Magnus works a huge amount of life into this story, and there's a huge amount of life to be had. Edward's story is a little bit strange in narrative terms because it's not all that interesting except in a very demi-monde way until he becomes king, at which point the story only has 10 years to go. But Magnus balances things really, really well. So it's a tempered recommendation, but still a recommendation. If you're interested in King Edward, you have to start there before you go anywhere else. Then we have a translated biography of another world-class figure. This is Einstein by Jürgen Neffe. Jürgen Neffe. I've read a lot of Einstein biographies. I'm always interested in them because, unlike with classical music or even art, with Einstein, you know for sure that the biographer does not understand the life work of the subject. And with Gardner's book on Bach, that is not true. He understands Bach's music as well as Bach did. With a lot of books on artists, it's not true. The person is an art historian or even an artist themselves, so they understand what's going on. Einstein? No. No. Einstein, other scientists? No. So I'm always curious to know how a biographer is going to get around that. And here, this biographer gets around it by just intensely humanizing his subject, who was intensely human to begin with. This is a biography that very much wants to take Einstein out of E = mc squared and give you the man, flaws and all. And I don't know of any Einstein biography that does a better job. Then we'll move on to history. This is Marion Mead's biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine. On my mind just recently, because last year there was a new Eleanor of Aquitaine biography that was quite good. Just didn't have there's a kind of an embracing narrative sweep, kind of a bear hug that you want a good biography to give you. You want to feel like it wraps you up in its subject, and this does that, very much so. Better than the best-selling biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine, and better than that recent one. Wonderfully insightful, with what amounts to very little in the way of primary documentation. Then we have another squish. This is a 2-volume life. This is Robert Crawford's biography of T.S. Eliot, which he broke up into young Eliot and then Eliot after the Wasteland. And I'm showing you young Eliot, but I actually mean the 2 books as one biography of Eliot. I'm sorry, that's the horrible unfairness of squish entries here, is that I'm actually recommending a whole lot more than one book. This list is probably 200 books long when you figure it all out. But Crawford is fantastic on Eliot, just fantastic. On the young Eliot and the older Eliot. I myself think that he's better on the young Eliot than he is on Eliot After the Wasteland. If I had to say which of the 2 volumes was marginally better, I would say this one. But they're together very much worth your time. Then we have Robert Richardson. This is his biography of Emerson, The Mind on Fire. Emerson's had a number of biographies, also did a lot of autobiographical writing himself, but this is great. Just great. This author wrote a number of biographies. This is the best one, and I have seen this on the little bookshelves of so many people, so many of them, because this is incredibly readable. It's an off-puttingly detailed subject, and Emerson at his heart is unknowable, which makes this, even the subject off-putting, but Richardson does a great job. It's a great job. Then we have Ali Alawi. Some might say is an interested figure, much like I mentioned with British politicians or American politicians writing about other politicians. You might be able to make that case here. I'm not going to make it. I don't believe it. I didn't see it in the book. This is a huge biography of King Faisal, who would be, if you don't know anything about this figure, again, you might know him as a bit player in the story of Lawrence of Arabia. This is a huge life, the huge life of him that he has always warranted. It might be good for you to know a little bit about his setting before you go into this book. I think if Alawi has a weak spot in this book, it's that he maybe presumes a little too much, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you'd get the sense in the first 2 chapters. Well worth your time to read. Well worth your time. Read this and also Robert Lacey's book, The Kingdom. Read those. There's 2. One is very old. This thing I think is 10 years old, but both well worth your time. Okay, then we get to P.N. Furbank, who I alluded to earlier in this video because he wrote a really good biography of Dennis Diderot. But his best biography, the thing that he'll be known for, is his biography of E.M. Forster, which takes you through every single recorded minute of Forster's life. And like so many of the figures that I'm mentioning here, Forster was a writer and kept meticulous details of everything that he ever did. Lists, scraps, notebooks, journals, letters galore, drafts of things, never threw anything away. And so primary material for a great biography, but you could still blow it if you didn't have sympathy with your subject, if you didn't know what to pick and choose, and Furbank does. So this is just a wonderful example of a literary biography. Then we get our next one is a figure who has had multiple biographies. This is the best one. This is Bob Asprey's book of Frederick the Great. It calls him the Magnificent Enigma, but he does a really good job of unraveling that enigma in these pages. This is utterly delightful. Just endlessly interesting. Frederick the Great was another example of someone where he's helping you to be interested in his story from almost the moment of his birth. But you still need a good biographer. I have known biographers to make this subject boring. Even this subject boring. Asprey does not. He does not. If you see this at a used bookstore, you should grab it. You're really going to enjoy it. Then we have another squish. This is Ramachandra Guha. This is his books on Gandhi. I have just one cover here, and this is the Alan Lane cover from the UK. The US edition didn't look like this. He did an earlier version on Dante in a suit and a bow tie as a lawyer. These are big, sprawling works. Fully detailed, big, sprawling works. They will give you everything. They give you the man and the whole world around him. And the significance of the man. Why is it that we think about this person? How did this person come to achieve the kind of posthumous fame? It's all on the page, wonderfully done. Okay, this next one is a squish. I don't know that it was ever a one volume. That's huge. It's absolutely huge. It's multiple volumes, and each volume is 1,000 pages long. Obsessively huge. It's a perfect example of a biographer who just became obsessed with this subject. It makes, I think, for hypnotic reading. This is Norman Sherry's biography of Graham Greene in multiple volumes. Multiple volumes. It took him like 150 years to write this. He went everywhere that Greene went. He ate everything that Greene ate. Disastrously, he drank everything that Greene drank. Met everyone. This is as primary, a ghastly example of a biographer doing the legwork, what's known as doing the legwork, as you could possibly imagine. This biography killed its author. but it's the last word on Graham Greene. So squish or no squish, if you are interested in Graham Greene, and Graham Greene led a fascinating life. Apart from his books, he led a fascinating life. You wouldn't think that would be possible considering how prolific he was. But he did. And Sherry gets it all. I'm not sure that you won't be a little disturbed by his presence on the page with you, but he gets it all. He gets every detail. Then we have Robert Hendrickson. I couldn't find a really good picture of this, but it's a squish. He wrote a 2-volume biography of Alexander Hamilton. He also wrote a 1-volume abridgment, if you find that. He's terrific on Hamilton, the best Hamilton biographer. No offense to Ron Chernow, who could have been on this list for his Hamilton biography. But these are 2 oversized hardcovers. They are not all that easy to find used at a used bookstore, but they are incredibly good. Just amazing. They are every detail, yes, like Sherry, but not like Sherry in that Hendrickson maintains his own personal identity and is a better writer, a really good writer. Okay, then we have another much biographied person, starting right away, starting before his body was cold. And then there have been multiple biographies since then. I had to choose. Many of those biographies are good. I just had to pick one. I couldn't really say what my yardstick was. This is Brenda Wineapple's biography of Nathaniel Hawthorne. There have been many. They all cover mostly the same ground. This one, I think, is better on the mature Hawthorne than a lot of them are. A lot of them, like the younger Hawthorne, the one who you really can't tell from this portrait what the younger Hawthorne looked like, but certainly is better than the old walrus Hawthorne with gigantic whiskers. This is better on the mature Hawthorne. I like this volume mainly for its coverage of the strong middle period of Hawthorne's life, when he knew he had fame, when he'd finally achieved it, when the world knew it, and when he was doing things, being appointed to things, getting recognized for things just routinely. But before any of that, it started to curdle. So after it was just a dream, and before it became a little bit of a burden. This book covers all those periods, but I think it's best on I guess what we could call middle period Hawthorne. Then another figure who's oft biographied. I like this biography the most. I think it pulls no punches. This is Carlos Baker's biography of Ernest Hemingway. Just a cover that I pulled off the internet. I've never seen a version with a cover like this, but Hemingway's had many, many biographies. I think Baker is the best, that does the best job, and mainly because, I hate to say it, but mainly for a reason that Hemingway himself would have approved of, which is that Baker really gets the work. He gets the writing better than any other biographer of Hemingway that I've read. He understands not just the genesis, the notebooks and the real world models for the fictional characters, but also he gets what's going on in the works in a way that every time I read this biography, it tempts me all over again to reread Hemingway. Then this next one, a little bit on the dry side, but I couldn't if I put a biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine on this list and I didn't put this, she'd haunt me for the rest of my life. So this is Warren's biography of Henry II. A big brick of a thing that is the final word on Henry II. Henry II was an utterly fascinating character. Talk about larger than life, which makes it all the more surprising to me that there haven't been more biographies of him. I guess it's because he's one of those figures where you can't really dash off a biography of him. You can for Henry VIII, for instance, or even Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth I, or even Queen Elizabeth II. You can dash off a book for them. But Henry II, you really have to dig in. It's a complicated period, very complicated. And maybe that's the reason. Or maybe people just look at Warren's book and say, well, I can't do better than that. And I shouldn't say dry. I shouldn't start off that way, because Warren can be very readable. It's just this is a big, old-fashioned props and stays biography. You just got to be ready for that. That's all. It's not trying to entertain you. So you just got to be ready for that. If you are, I think you'll really enjoy it. Oh, speak of the devil. Okay, this is almost 100 years old, but in terms of readability, you're not going to get any better than this. This is Henry VIII by Francis Hackett. this is an older biography of Henry, but there hasn't been anything new. And Henry is still gone. He hasn't come back and said anything new. And this is so beautifully written. Just so beautifully written. That whatever it might lose in not being up to date on the latest historical fads in terms of interpreting Henry, whatever it loses in that, it gains in readability. This is just a page turner of a book. Beautifully, beautifully written. I've quoted from it many times on this channel. All right, then we have Walter Isaacson. I could have put a couple of books on here. I think I'm going to go with his best book. His name is in low repute with me right now because of his Elon Musk biography. I don't think he'll ever recover from that for me. I doubt that I'll even feel like reading his next book. So I stuck instead with his masterpiece, which is his biography of Steve Jobs, who, like Musk, was also an imbecile and a cultural vandal. But here, at least, he's portrayed that way. Here, this is very much a warts and all biography. There is a little bit of hero worship here, a little bit. Isaacson is not as brutal with Jobs as he should be in a couple of places, especially when it comes to Apple computers. To say nothing of his personal life, which was almost one unmitigated train wreck. Again, I'm reading this in light of Isaacson's prolonged job application that was his biography of Elon Musk, where Musk has never done anything wrong to anyone. An absolute flat absurdity. This isn't that bad. It, in fact, is far different, light years away. This is actually insightful in many, many places. This occasioned a gigantic chorus of critical response because I think critics were thinking, well, okay, I don't know exactly what I read there, but that was an interesting thing. So I do recommend it. I definitely do recommend it, especially since, apart from anything else, apart from how Jobs treated his coworkers or his lackeys or his children or his family or whatnot, it's no small thing to read a biography of a person who was responsible, at least in some direct, broader way, for things that you have in your home. Now, right this minute. Can't say that about Leonardo da Vinci. You can't say that about almost anybody. You can say it about Steve Jobs. That made it fascinating for me. Okay, then this next one is a squish. You could read every volume. I strongly advise it. This is Robert Caro's life of Lyndon Johnson. For those of you outside of America, Lyndon Johnson was a political animal for decades before he became president on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And Caro decided, rather than synopsize those earlier years when he was just a lanky sociopath from the hills, he would write about them in glorious detail, find everybody who knew him, all that sort of thing. And so the early volumes here, you wouldn't believe it, but the early volumes actually make really good reading. This climaxes with Master of the Senate, the big middle volume in which, for a long time, Johnson was the most powerful person in Washington, D.C., other than the president. And decided, in a mystifying move to a lot of people with long odds said, no, he'll never do that, I'll bet you $1,000. Decided to give that all up for a notoriously powerless position as vice president. Warm bucket of you-know-what, as John Adams put it. He decided to do that. And when he was asked, he said the number of presidents who've died in office, and that he was a gambling man. Whether or not he loaded the dice, we'll leave for another video, but he didn't know that. We don't think he knew that was going to happen, so this becomes all the more fascinating. I know that some of you are going to say it's not even a squish because the series is not finished yet. We'll leave that for another video as well. Then we have W. Jackson Bate. I did not include Boswell's Life of Johnson in this video, even though it is widely regarded as the greatest biography ever written. I didn't do it because it's older. This is a more modern list. But I still couldn't leave Johnson out of it. So I included Jackson Bates' biography of Samuel Johnson, which is great. It is on practical, informational, and even 30,000-foot perspective views, a better biography of Samuel Johnson than Boswell wrote. Nothing can touch Boswell in terms of immediacy and weirdness. But this is better than that in a lot of ways. So, and also immensely readable. Jackson Bate is immensely readable. Another figure on this list, I could have put other biographies by him, but I was trying to control myself. Then we get, okay, I mentioned Samuel Beckett earlier, a great Irish literary figure that I don't like at all. I still read biographies, and the same thing is true with this. This is one of the most popular biographies of the 20th century. This is Ellmann's biography of James Joyce, the other great Irish literary figure that I don't like at all, unless you're going to count Edna O'Brien. We might count Edna O'Brien as well. No, but I'm not sure even her fans would rank her with Beckett and Joyce. It doesn't matter what I think of Joyce. This is still a great biography. I loved it. Just wonderfully, wonderfully put together. Then this next one is a smush. I don't think there's ever been a one volume. I strongly recommend it. It is leapingly readable. Just wonderfully readable. This is Rainer Stark. This is his 3-volume biography of Kafka. This is 1 volume, Kafka, the early years. There are 2 others. They all look, there's a very distinct orange livery. And they cover fairly short life in enormous detail. But the thing about this that I love most, the element about it, is the same one I mentioned for McCullough's biography of Thomas Cromwell, which is that the biographer is actively present on every page, in every paragraph. There's no autopilot in these, none at all. Everything is being carefully looked over. And that's terrific. That's an incredibly invigorating reading experience, I think. Then this next person has had many, many biographies. I'm going to choose one of the first ones that is still one of the best ones. And if you are tempted to go into the comments field and start typing in untrustworthy court historian, kindly don't. Kindly don't. I know a lot more about this subject than you do. Please don't. I don't think anyone's going to, but if you happen to wander on this video, please don't presume to teach me on this subject. Okay, that's all I'll say. This is Ted Sorenson's book on John F. Kennedy. You can find this in any number of editions, hardcover, paperback. I'm sure the first edition is valuable now. This is tremendously detailed. It is tremendously heartfelt. Its author loved its subject. If you can show me anywhere in the biographer's rule book where that necessitates that the book will be bad, I'd love you to do it, but you can't, so don't. It's rhetorical. Okay. The biographer loved his subject. If that's a mortal sin when it comes to biography, then he's guilty. But it's not, because the only way that would be guilty is if he made a bad biography out of it, and he doesn't. This is tremendous, and also tremendously readable, as you would expect from Sorenson. This is William Taubman. He wrote a couple of biographies that I could have included on this list, but since I had Kennedy on the list, I included this one too. One of the most important Soviet leaders of them all. Not as important as another subject that Taubman wrote about, but still mighty important. And that's himself, Nikita Khrushchev. This is terrific. Of course, Khrushchev biography and any other biography like this is hampered by the fact that a huge number of records were not available to Taubman and are still not available. I don't foresee that changing. I don't have any idea if that will change. Soviet archives open and then close all the time. The future ruler of America for the next 25 years is a deep sycophant and also a paid employee of the current ruler of Russia, but the current ruler of Russia might not be the ruler of Russia in a year or two. So who knows? What I'm trying to say is the state of those archives. Who knows? There's a huge amount on Khrushchev that is not and has never been public. So working with what he has, Taubman does a great job with this shrewd moron. Khrushchev was a shrewd moron. He was an idiot, but he knew that he was an idiot. And that can make all the difference. I firmly believe that he and Kennedy, to a greater and lesser extent, 60% and 40%, 70% and 30%, are the reason we're here now. As opposed to, the whole race having gone extinct in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, then we have a great big book by Ben Bradley. It's a sports biography, like we started off with Ali. This is even bigger than Ike's book on Ali. And we must remember that you don't have to like the subject. No one has to like the subject for the biography to be good. That is true, most especially with Adolf Hitler, although I don't think Hitler's on this list. I could easily have done it, but there is so much that I could have put on this list. This is Ben Bradley's life of Ted Williams, the kid. Ted Williams was a raging nuclear a-hole his whole life. Fans have tried to put a spin on that. People have come forward. You say that in a gathering of baseball fans, guaranteed some 90-year-old's going to come forward and say, well, I saw him at an airport once and he patted my head. if he patted your head when you were a kid, it's because he thought he lost a nickel in your hair. Okay? Not any other reason. He was a jerk. An absolute jerk. Doesn't matter. Titan of the game. And Bradley is great at writing about him. Jerk or no jerk. He's great at writing about him. Well, of course, Bradley doesn't think he was a jerk. I could tell you stories of Ted Williams. But anyway, this next one is a squish. And it's a squish much along the lines of Robert Caro, who did not live to finish his Lyndon Johnson biography. This author did not live to finish it. Got a very, very good, talented set of hands to bring it across the finish line. And it's wonderful. If you find the box set, buy it and send it to me. And then buy another box set for yourself. This is William Manchester. This is his multi-volume biography of Winston Churchill, who, as you can see on this picture, when he's all of 18 years old, was leading a fascinating life right from the beginning. Literally, from where he was born. You could tell stories about just the building where he was born in. And on from there. And Manchester covers it all in wonderful, breathless, signature prose. I think it's wonderful that the co-writer that he took on at the end for the third volume, I had the pleasure of talking with him a number of times with that co-writer. I thought it was really wonderful that as a tribute to Manchester, he does not try to ventriloquize that particular voice on the page. So you, in the third volume, the final volume, you can definitely tell that the hand at the pen is different from Manchester. Not that it matters. The hand at the pen is still wonderful. But this is considerably more hospitable to the reader than Martin Gilbert's book on Churchill, which is much longer, huge volumes. But this is more hospitable, and that kind of detail you don't really need. There he is. All right, look at that face. All right, this is Gerald Gunther's biography of Learned Hand, the justice, the judge, Learned Hand, who is the what? Don't let the cover fool you. He should have picked a different cover. He spent a lot of time smiling. In terms of legal lives, there are a couple of legal lives on this list. Learned Hand was probably the most influential legal figure in the United States history who was not a Supreme Court justice, and led a fascinating life and was articulate about it the whole time. Talk about an indefatigable letter writer and journal keeper. So believe it or not, I know you might hear that and think, the biography of a judge? How could that possibly be a recommend? I do recommend it. I bet you would like it. I bet if you gave it a try, I bet you would. Then we'll go to something very short. Once upon a time, Penguin did a series of Penguin Lives, little things that were just 100 pages long, tiny little booklets. And with any series like that, you don't know what you're going to get. Some of them will be better than others. And Roy Blunt, the humorist, wrote a biography of Robert E. Lee for that series. And it is great. Lee, I could have been on this list a number of times. He's had a number of great biographers. If there's ever a follow-up to this list, one of those will be on here. But this will take you no more than an afternoon to read. And it is wonderful. Really, really insightful. He doesn't come to the same conclusions about Lee that I come to and have always come to, but nevertheless, it's still a worthwhile book. Then we have Jeffrey Stewart. This is a more modern book. I think the paperback has a very good blurb. This was just terrific. This is The New Negro, his biography of Alan Locke, sort of the grandfather of the Harlem Renaissance, and a fascinating figure. So a figure who, well, I mean, if you're familiar with the writings of James Baldwin, then you will know the America that Alan Locke encountered. An America that, when he encountered it, had such deeply ingrained offhand prejudices on color distinctions that it was like breathing. All his life, he encountered people who had that kind of prejudice and didn't even know it, had no idea. It was like breathing to them. He encountered the virulent kind as well, but he encountered a whole world that didn't want him and didn't know what to make of him. And he got to work right away, letting it know what to make of him. This is a big, generous biography. The biography is always needed. And it's wonderful. Just wonderful. I think there's a paperback now, but the paperback or the hardcover, they're probably new enough so that they will be at your library. And this one, T. Harry Williams wrote a book. This was a long time ago, 50, 60 years ago. So this might not be available anymore. But I've mentioned political biographies so far. As terms of political biographies, this is really, really good. This is his biography of Huey Long, the Kingfish. A thoroughgoing, corrupt political life in the South. Weird, twists and turns. Of course, the ending, you know the ending. You know how the story ends, just like with John F. Kennedy. You know how the story ends, but lots and lots of detail between then and here. This, I often cite this. It's so well written that I often cite it as being the nonfiction, a worthy nonfiction counterpart to Robert Penn Warren's book, All the King's Men, which is also about Huey Long, but it's a great novel, one of the two great American political novels. Then this next one, this is by Carol Bundy. I have never stopped thinking about this book since I first read it. It's so strange, so wonderful and strange. It's a book, allegedly it's a biography of Charles Russell Lowell, Jr., but it's called The Nature of Sacrifice. There he is on the cover. It would certainly have been either president of Harvard or president of the United States, one of the two. As you can tell from the cover of the title, it's about more than Charles Russell Lowell Jr. It's about him and all of his friends and that whole generation and the Civil War and what it did to that whole generation. I never stopped thinking about this book. It's in this room. You might actually be able to see it. No? Yeah, there it is. There it is, right next to The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. It's in this room. I never stopped thinking about it. It is really, really thought-provoking, really good. It is a biography of Charles Russell Lowell Jr., but he didn't live very long, so it has to be more than that. Then we have Peter Robb. This is not a book for the faint of heart, but this is his book, M, The Man Who Became Caravaggio. And that life, the life of this artist, the life of Caravaggio, is... I mean, there's beautiful works of art, but the life was horrifying. Scabrous and violent and vile. Makes for great reading, but uneasy reading, unsettling reading. This was not a man you ever wanted to meet or come anywhere physically near. And a lot of people in his life paid for that, learned that the hard way. And Rob doesn't blanket any of that. This book employs no euphemisms whatsoever. So it makes for very gripping reading in a way that you don't expect from an artist's life. We've got another artist's life or two on this list, and they aren't like that. Then we have an odd book. I love this book. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. This is Sebastian de Gracia. This is his book, Machiavelli in Hell. A biography of Machiavelli, who, again, like so many people on this list, if you only know one thing about him, you will know him as the basis of an adjective. Well, isn't that a Machiavellian thing to do? But you won't know who you're talking about, except that he wrote The Prince. You won't know anything about the man. You won't know anything about how the twists and turns of his posthumous literary legacy led to the construction that we have today. You won't know any of that. And this book, I'm not sure, will shed any light on any of that. This book is very much marching to the beat of its own drummer. It is one of the oddest biographies on this list. You'll know right away what I'm talking about. If you read just the first 10 pages, you'll know right away. It keeps getting more and more brilliant. It is amazing. But it's not a cookie cutter normal biography. I recommend it all the most strongly for that. You will get caught up in it. Sebastian de Gracia really can write. Then this next one is another royal biography. I've mentioned this a couple of times on this channel. This is David Teams's book, Majesty, about King James, who, again, you won't know anything about. If you don't know anything about him, all you'll know is the King James Bible. That he gave the go-ahead for the King James Bible, showing that you can get real immortality through literary consignments. If you know a little bit more about him, you might know that he dribbled when he talked, that he was irresponsibly fond of boys, that he ignored his governing for his whims. And this book tells you that all of that is wrong, that all of that is lies, anti-Stuart lies, and then starts to back it up. I don't know that Teams will completely convince you, but this stopped me dead in my tracks when I read it. Just dead in my tracks in terms of what I had always assumed about King James. And I think it will you too. Whether or not you end up agreeing, I think we can all agree that we want biographies to do that, right? You don't want to read a hymn in a church pew. You want a biography to challenge the subject, to root around, find out what is true and what isn't. What do we know and what don't we know? You want that, I would think. I would hope. All right, then we'll get to... this is by Jung Chang and John Halliday. And this is amazing. It's an amazing book. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, not necessarily the viewers of this video, but the reading public, because this book was embraced. It outsold its expectations at its publishing house by a factor of 100. And this is a gigantic biography of Chairman Mao. It's all about Mao Zedong. It's really, really good reading. Talk about an ambivalent approach to the subject. Mao was, I think, hands down, the greatest mass murderer in the history of the human race. Certainly the greatest mass murderer in the 20th century. And a 20th century that includes both Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, that's no small feat. I think it's safe to say that he was directly responsible for the deaths of more humans than any other human on Earth. And led an incredibly, fascinatingly transformative period in Chinese history. And this book captures a lot of that. I really wish, I mean, I have an ebook of this, I think. I really wish I had a print and paper copy of this. I don't, because next time I find a print and paper copy, I will reread it, because it is well worth the effort. It's an uphill battle as a book, but it's well worth it. Then we'll move on. Frank McGlynn is a professional biographer. I love his work. I could easily have put 10 of his books on this list, easily. But I chose one. This is his great big biography of Marcus Aurelius. We on the BroTube circuit refer to him simply as Marcus. We high-five him every day once we put on our BroTube cow crap ring and our giant ostentatious analog watch. Then we high-five him at 5 in the morning, of course, because we all get up really early. Again, if you know Marcus Aurelius, you will know him only from the Meditations, the little book of his. But this is a fascinating life, a fascinating sprawling period in Roman history, and Frank McGlynn is a great writer. He's just a fantastic writer. I might not always agree with his subject matter. I might not always agree even with his take on his subject matter, as I had occasion to disagree with him in print on one of his more recent books, trying to whitewash another huge mass murderer. Marcus Aurelius wasn't guilty of that many murders, and he is a fascinating figure, despite what the dude bros say. Then we have Susan Quinn. This is a terrific book. Very, very smart, very sad in ways that are very controlled. This is her biography of Marie Curie. Another great scientific life, and another perfect example of the fact that the biographer knows perfectly well she is not going to understand what her subject understood. She knows perfectly well that's going to be true. She knows perfectly well that when Marie Curie goes into the lab, she's not going to be able to follow her there. And some biographers don't like that, and you can sense the resentment. Not only true with scientists, but true with anybody else as well. Any other figure. You can often sense when a biographer is, for instance, upset that they can't follow Henry VIII into his back closet and know what's going on in there, because they weren't invited. But in this case, the lack of an invitation is simply the lack of knowledge. A wonderful job anyway, and it will tell you a lot. And you probably heard Marie Curie's name. You probably know she's a giant figure in scientific history, but you probably don't know much about her. And this gives you the whole woman, the whole life, and it is fascinating. Just fascinating. A revisitable, one of the yardsticks that I wanted to use with this list is, can you revisit these works? Can you reread them for fun? Some of them push the boundaries there. I'm not sure that the Frank Dostoevsky biographies can be reread for fun. I'm not sure that they can be read for fun. I doubt that anybody would ever want to reread Warren's biography of Henry II. But for most of these, I'm trying to pick things that are narratively good, where the biographer has not forgotten that the job is to entertain the reader. Same thing with this next one. This author has written a number of biographies. I just included the one, Mary Queen of Scots, by the great Antonia Fraser. She's done a number of biographies, but this one, well, it sold. Let's put it that way. It sold like crazy. But it's also wonderful. Heavily detailed, but wonderful. Then we have another squish. This is Herschel Parker wrote two gigantic volumes of a biography of Herman Melville. I just have one volume here, but they are wonderful. Again, Melville has had a few really good biographies. I could have put a couple more on this list, but this is the best. This is the definitive Herman Melville biography. There was a Melville biography in that Penguin Live series that was only 100 pages long, and it's terrific. Absolutely terrific. But if you're going at a biography of someone like Hawthorne or Melville, and you want lots and lots of detail, so not an overview, you want lots and lots of detail. Where did they ever go to St. Louis? Basically. And if they did, what did they eat there? If you want that sort of detail, these are the books. These two volumes are wonderful. Then we have a gigantic poet life. Which, if you think writers' lives, maybe you've got an irrational prejudice against writers' lives, it must be double for poets. Nevertheless, if they led an interesting life, or if they find the right writer, in this case it's both. This is Langdon Hammer's biography of James Merrill. A nice, long biography of a great American poet. So you have Frank O'Hara and you have James Merrill. This has every friend, every lover, every benefice, every house, every letter. So it's everything that you would want if you want, and some people, myself included, want biographies that go into granular detail on the subject. I love that, provided the writer is good. And if you want that for Jimmy Merrill, you're going to get it in this book. Then we have another squish. I don't think there's ever been a one volume of this, but it's too good to miss. And this is Edmund Morris's 3-volume biography of Theodore Roosevelt. Starting with the rise of Theodore Roosevelt, then my favorite volume, Theodore Rex, and then the volume Colonel Roosevelt after his White House time, after his years in the White House. Don't let the title, everybody called Roosevelt Colonel. Everybody did his whole life. Even when he was president, people would call him Colonel. Morris needed something to call that 3rd volume. And there have been a couple of really good volumes about Roosevelt out of office, but this is the best one. No one writes like Morris. These are just amazing. Just amazing. You would think that the first volume, for instance, Theodore Roosevelt before he became president, would not be interesting. But no, not at all. He was a cow-punching canyon dude. He was a hard-ass police commissioner. He was a Tammany Hall politician. He was everything. He was everything. And Morris throws himself at the work. Just amazing. Just amazing. Okay, then we have Louise Hall Tharp. This is a great biography of a very maddening figure. This is her book, Mrs. Jack, her biography of Isabella Stewart Gardner, the title referring to her husband, Black Jack Gardner. This is the woman who, among many other things, created the Gardner Museum here in Boston, which is a must-stop. It's a must-see thing. If you come to Boston, you simply must go to the Gardner Museum. It's in her old home. And it's like no museum. It's like a handful of museums anywhere on Earth. But she also led a larger-than-life, very colorful life her whole time here in Boston and abroad in Venice and elsewhere. And she's had other biographies. Louise Hall Tharp does a great, great job. Literarily, come chat with me on the couch style. A later biography of hers was written by a friend of mine, and Natalie Dykstra, who wrote the Clover Adams biography earlier in this list, is writing a new biography of Mrs. Gardner this year. But this is the one to read. If you're going to read just one, and that's really all you need to do, then this is the one to read. Then we have Alexander the Great, who has been getting biographies written of him for 2,000 years. So there have been many, no shortage of them. This is a little bit personal, a little bit weird as a biography. I strongly believe that you would love it, that it would pull you in if you started to read it. This is The Nature of Alexander by Mary Ray Nolan. I'm not putting Peter Green on here or any other more academic Alexander biographer. I could. They are really good. Some of those are really good. But this is different. This is different. I used to say for years and years, I used to characterize this as a biography of Alexander the Great written by a biographer who is personally in love with her subject. And I think there's a reading of this book in which that is true. But I was asked to stop saying that and I was given a long 3-page exegesis on how that is not true. And how that misserves both the author and the subject. Since that plea came from one of the 2 names on this cover, I decided I would do it. That I would stop saying that. So I won't say that in this video, even though everybody's long dead, except me, somehow. I won't say that. This is a very passionate biography, though. I am not meaning that as a reviewer euphemism. This is a very passionate, very personal biography of Alexander there. How's that? Is that good? The author is still in complete command of the very tiny number of sources that we have. I don't think you need more than that. Okay, this next one is by Gail Christensen, and this is In the Presence of the Creator, a great biography of Isaac Newton. In this case, perhaps more than any other case, even Einstein, the biographer cannot follow where Newton goes mentally. I don't think there was a human on Earth who could have done that before or since. But there are a lot of great stories here. A lot of them. And the time period is wonderfully evoked as well. Better than any Newton biography that I've ever read. I think there's only one other Newton biography that even comes close to this one, but this is better. Just better. Just a more enjoyable reading experience. Then we have something fairly new. I wrote about this book. This is by Richard Zenith. This is a big, big book about a weird author who barely ever left his room and who ate the same thing every day for 20 years. So you would think, what can you possibly do with that kind of material? How can you possibly make that interesting? The author does it. Richard Zenith does it. This is his biography of Pessoa. And it's great. It's great. Against all odds. It's great. It just pulls you in and swirls you all around, because as the cover design here is showing you, Pessoa was actually many people. In a far more fundamental way than a writer, for instance, on a lark, picking up a pseudonym for, a periodical somewhere in the upper Midwest. Maybe somebody wants to write under a pseudonym, God forbid. This was not that. This was not an author writing under pseudonyms. This was an author being pseudonyms, many of them. All of them living in the same steamer trunk. None of that's going to make any sense to you. So you should read the book. Believe it or not. Even if you've never read Pessoa, you probably haven't. You're going to be swept away by the job that this biographer does. All right, then we have another squish. This is a big undertaking, and a big undertaking, and also a big undertaking on a figure that I have nothing but contempt for. And yet, the biography is incredible. Absolutely incredible. This is John Richardson's biography, his multi-volume life of Picasso. I think Picasso is a complete fraud as an artist. I don't think he had any talent whatsoever. And what little talent he might have had when he was an early draftsman, he quickly got rid of as soon as the world told him he didn't need to use it. Talent's difficult. Why even hold on to it if you don't need to? I don't have to agree with Richardson. I don't have to agree with him when he does this kind of a thing, when he does this kind of a job. This is an amazing work. Just amazing. Whether you like Picasso's work or not, whether you like the man or not, who was a brutal monster, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is biography done at such a rarefied height that it doesn't matter if you like the subject. Then we have Kenneth Silverman. This is his biography of Edgar Allan Poe. Very, very provocatively titled Edgar A. Poe. Where is he without the Allen? Where is he without that? No, still. That title is meant to sort of signify that you are not going to be getting just the normal theater program here. That Kenneth Silverman digs into what we know about Poe, rips it apart, pulls it apart. How do we know this is true? What does this mean? What about this? Could this actually be Poe? And nobody's seen it before? Just wonderful. And it's a bit old as a biography. There have been a couple of Poe biographies just in the last couple of years. But nothing has ever been as good as this. So not everything on this list is the best biography of its subject. This is not meant to be a best of list, just recommendations. These are I can recommend everything on here. But I don't know of a biography of Poe that's better than Silverman's. And then we have, this is Peter Hebblethwaite. I believe this was authorized to the limited extent that it could be. I believe that it was. This is Shepherd of the Modern World. This is a biography of Pope John the 23rd. Boy, oh boy, did we have a pope. I know that if you're of a certain age and you think of popes, you're going to think of John Paul II, a towering figure on the world stage. You're going to think of that. Or maybe Pope Francis, the current pope. But probably when you come to mind with a big pope, someone where you're supposed to know the name, or the world knows the name, you think of John Paul II. And when I think of John Paul II, I think of him as a distant echo of a truly great pope, of someone who actually did change the lives of billions of people on earth. And that was this pope. That was John the 23rd, and this is a terrific biography. Just terrific. I don't know. I guess I was going to say I don't know why, but I guess I do know why, right? The Catholic Church was rocked by an unbelievably gigantic sex scandal that is ongoing. Institutions, even institutions that are 2,000 years old and have more money than God, typically don't survive that kind of thing, and certainly you don't rush to come out with new biographies. There was recently a 2-volume biography of Pope Benedict, for instance, that was really, really good. But a cloud hung over it. A cloud hung over that. So if anybody out there is writing a big biography of John the 23rd, that would be great. But this is wonderful. This particular biography is wonderful. Then we have Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is by Carolyn Fraser. This is her book Prairie Fires, about the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Really, really good. Again, if you know this author, you will just know her book, Little House on the Prairie. You won't know maybe the sequels, but you won't know anything about her life. And there's an argument to be made that you know a lot about her life if you've read all the Little House books, but there's so much more to it than that. Especially for me, I noticed predictably the publishing side, the business side of her life. But Prairie Fires is just terrific on all sides of her life. Just really, really good. Then we have, there are official biographies of figures. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I'm going to try and pull away from them. They're an acquired taste. I don't want to recommend you an official biography of someone and have you get mired in it and wonder where Steve's recommending power is gone. So they are an acquired taste. But there's also there are unofficial lives, of course. There's an official life where the executors vet what you're doing. Then there's an unofficial life where you're just going on public documents. You're not asking any permission from the executors, so they have no say over what you write. And then there's the rabble-rousing biography, the biography that takes public documents but takes a decidedly irreverent tone. And that would be true here. This is John Mack's great book, A Prince of Our Disorder, his book about Lawrence of Arabia. There was one Lawrence of Arabia biography other than this that was far more scandalous, incendiary. This is not that. This is far more controlled, but this is not a hero's life at all. There is an authorized biography. There is an authorized biography of Lawrence of Arabia that's huge, and I really like it. But this is a completely different reading experience. Still, I believe the greatness of the man still comes through, but very different tone and register. You get that a lot in biographies. You could easily do a pairing of official and unofficial biography. Then we have Paula Byrne. This is a fairly recent book. I was enchanted by it. I loved it. It's The Adventures of Miss Barbara Pym. There is a biographical volume of Barbara Pym's writings called A Very Private Eye that is really, really good. But this is the full biography. And wonderful. Pym's voice is so irrepressible. And she led an interesting life. She was interested in her life the whole time, up to the last few years. She was interested in her life the whole time. And this book really conveys that. It feels like a romp. It feels, Paula Byrne doesn't have Barbara Pym's writing ability. Almost nobody does. But nevertheless, there are distinct efforts, I think, made in this book to make this read a little bit like a Barbara Pym novel. Or maybe just to convey the fact that Barbara Pym's life read like a Barbara Pym novel in some ways. I love this book so much that I can forgive The Frequent Cats. Then we have Jack Beatty. This is his biography of James Michael Curley, the legendary mayor of Boston. This is the Rascal King. Curley was both the epitome of Tammany Hall style American political corruption and also a cartoon of it. The kind of version of it that you had to love, that you have to smile when you're reading it. Whether you're reading his own book, I Do It Again, or whether you're reading anything else that's written by him, The Purple Shamrock, or anything else that's written about him. He has had a mansion right here in Jamaica Plain that you can go and see. It's just a little bit of ways from where I am right now. And he was so famously corrupt that he also, like Huey Long, he inspired a great American political novel, The Last Hurrah by Edwin O'Connor. Beatty does a fantastic job. I won't say that this is as good a reading experience as The Last Hurrah, but it's from rags to riches to rags as a story. Just amazing. Curley was actually larger than life, so I mean his life reads like something you would put in a novel. If you're interested in Boston politics, if you're interested in that mansion in Boston, if you're interested in anything that of the previous era, previous generation in old, corrupt, ward boss politics of a type that has been eradicated in United States politics. All but eradicated in United States politics. Now there is corruption in the United States politics because there's a Trumpist party, but it's mobster style. It's not. The old ward bosses were not mobsters. It's difficult to explain what they were, but they weren't that. They could be coercive, but Trumpism is just sending death threats to your opponents. That's all that it is. That's how you win. That's how you get people to not run. That's also how you will depress voter turnout in a national election for president. So it isn't actually a presidential election. It's much more of a mob shakedown. It's just threats to your opponents, physical threats to your opponents. Curley wouldn't have put up with that. Most of the politicians in his day would not have put up with it. There was coercion involved, but it was different. And Beatty captures it wonderfully. You'll understand it. I don't know, to the extent that you can understand it. Read The Rascal King and read The Last Hurrah. together, and you will understand Boston politics at a time when that was an actual term. When Boston politics was something you could mention in conversation, and people would understand what you meant by it. But anyway, let's move on. The next one is big book, Heather Clark, another author biography. This is Red Comet. I loved this. I was commissioned to review this, and as a result, I went to the Boston Public Library and the other library that I'm a member of here in Boston, and just got a stack of Sylvia Plath biographies and read them all. And read this one, and I honestly do believe, I know it could be the bias of presentism, but I honestly do believe this is the best one of them all. A couple of the early biographies, one of which I could have put on this list, maybe are a little bit better on the works, but this is terrific on the person. Compensatorily better on the person. I loved it. On Sylvia Plath, I really understood her better. Then an oldie but a goodie, still 20th century. This is Esther Forbes, who all of you will know because she wrote Johnny Tremain. If you were of a certain age, you had to read Johnny Tremain in school. But she also wrote nonfiction, and she wrote a biography of Paul Revere and the world he lived in. That is great. Just great. It takes you far, far, far beyond The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, even though that's the famous Grant Wood cover that you got here. It takes you far beyond The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, even beyond the silversmithing, which a lot of people don't know anything about. Most people don't know anything about Revere's political life, his long political life. And this book covers it all, and in wonderful, wonderful mid-20th century prose that is just, the people wrote better then. That's plain and simple. They just wrote better. Almost all of them wrote better. So that doesn't matter what the subject is, but in this case, the subject is very good. I could have filled this list with founding father biographies. This list could easily have been 1,000 pages long. This next one is by Bartholomew Sparrow. I debated whether or not to put this on this list over the months and months that I've been putting this together, because of course a list like this could not be thrown together overnight. Please. This took months and months, which is why you support me on Patreon, to make videos like this possible. I hesitated about putting this on this list because it's insider baseball, it's insider American politics, and not everybody's going to want to read about that. But then I thought, well, you're putting Caro's Lyndon Johnson biographies on there, and aside from the volume when he's president, all of that is insider American politics. Johnson was a complete political animal, but evil. So I thought, why not put an insider baseball politician book on there of someone who wasn't evil? So Brent Scowcroft is up. This is The Strategist. This is Bartholomew Sparrow's biography of Brent Scowcroft, who was a weird kind of a fixture, the man to see about U.S. foreign policy. It's kind of a good version of Henry Kissinger, because presidents get elected into office until 2024. They get elected into office, and they don't know anything about anything. They're politicians. They don't know anything about anything. They don't know anything about policy. They don't know anything about the pros and cons. Nothing about in the weeds details of international diplomacy, which is why you need people to stick around who do know that stuff, or you're going to blunder, and the blunders can hurt your country and other countries. So people kept Scowcroft around because he knew everybody and he knew how things worked. And I didn't think that Bartholomew Sparrow or anybody could make an involving reading experience out of that, but he does. So this is a tailored recommendation because you would need to care about such things in a way that, I don't know, Einstein, Henry VIII, you probably wouldn't need to care, or Leonardo da Vinci, you probably wouldn't need to care much about them to be sort of kind of interested in a biography of them. But Brent Scowcroft, that's different. You're gonna need to care about American politics in the 20th century. If you do, it's a terrific book. Then back to literary biography. This is Frances Kieran. This is her book, Seeing Mary Plain, about Mary McCarthy, who's now all but forgotten. People don't read The Group anymore. They don't read Birds of America. They don't read her nonfiction at all, unfortunately. There is a Library of America volume. There will be another Library of America volume. So there's hope that people can still find her. Those things are in bookstores. They're in libraries. She was a great writer, great commentator on the American scene, and led a fascinating life, knew everybody, talked with everybody. Everybody knew her. She's had a couple of biographies, and I think this is the best one. Really gives you all the details. All right, this next one is a little bit like Dear Genius, a little bit of a stretch. I think it counts as a biography. This is Richard Kapuscinski, and this is his book on the Shah, on Shah Pahlavi, on the last Shah, The Shah, that some of you of a certain age will know, used to be an American client dictator. And he was booted in the same way that most of the rational world was booted by the Khomeini revolution. But Kapuscinski wrote a book about him called The Shah of Shahs. And it's terrific. I think it counts. I think it mostly counts as a biography. Certainly, you will get a biography of the Shah in here. There's a lot of other stuff going on in here as well. As a shrewd study of iconography, a very interesting study of U.S. complicity, the canceled checks in the Shah's desk and whatnot. You get a lot of that, but I believe this counts as a biography, and it's a great reading experience. And it's not long, so you'll know right away whether or not you like it, whether or not you're on the same page. And we'll go back to another biography of a poet. This is Richard Holmes. This is Shelley, The Pursuit. This cover is the cover of the New York Review of Books paperback that they came out with. They came out with an oversized paperback of this. That's it. Quite well made. Unlike a lot of their books, quite well made. But you can find the hardcover too. This is a great biography of Percy Bysshe Shelley. I think the best one. Great by the yardstick that you don't need to care about Shelley's poetry. You're still going to be drawn into the story. Holmes is a really, really good writer. That's going to help a lot. Then this next one is another group biography. We saw the Brontes. This is another one, another group biography, considerably more enjoyable raw material to work with than a bunch of consumptives in a parsonage out on the moors. This is considerably more enjoyable stuff to work with here. This is Mary Lovell's book, The Sisters, which is about the Mitford sisters. And they never had a boring day. Any of them did. And they wrote copiously. This is a big, fat, wonderful book that covers why they fascinated a whole era the way they did. Both positively and negatively. Covers all of the Mitford, gives them all really good emphases of their own, shows you the world that they embodied, and that shows you that world dying. And only one of them actually managed to ride the currents. It was the one that everyone would have thought wasn't the one who would ever do it, the least likely to do that. I find the Mitfords fascinating. I think they're also fascinating to read. Just this book is full of their own words. So if you find them fascinating too, maybe you've read Jessica Fellowes' book. Her books, she's done a series of murder mysteries starring the Mitford sisters. Maybe you've read those books from your library and liked them. Might want to read about the originals. In this case, the original it's not going to read like dry biography at all. Then this next one is one of the best biographies that I know of. This would certainly be on a best list. This is not a best list. This is a recommendation list. But this is terrific. Absolutely terrific. I mentioned it, praised it many times before. This is Son of the Morning Star by Evan S. Connell, who wrote great fiction as well. Wrote Mr. Bridge and Mrs. Bridge. But this is his biography of George Armstrong Custer, leading up to the Battle of Little Bighorn, when he and a lot of his men were eradicated. And it's great. It's just great. It is not at all what you think when you are expecting a biography of Custer. Not at all. And if you're wondering what it is that you would be expecting, well, think of Custer biographies that you already know, subsequent Custer biographies to this one. Think of Nathaniel Philbrick's book, The Last Stand, or any other of a number of different books. You're getting much of a muchness. You're getting what you expect from that. This is not that. This is, first of all, it's 10 times better written than any Custer biography that's ever existed or ever will exist. But also, it's sly, and it has a plan, a program of its own. It's not subversive. You're not being fed a line of hooey, but it's very much crafted as a work of art, not just a dutiful biography. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. Then we have a big doorstop of a thing. This is Alan Eckert. This is his book of Tecumseh, A Sorrow in Our Heart. This is a big brick of a thing, and it is brought alive by Eckert's idiosyncratic view of how to do this sort of thing, how to do this kind of a biography. He explains it at the beginning of this book. He explains it in a bunch of other books as well. Talk about walking on the borderline between fiction and nonfiction, like we saw with Clarence Darrow for The Defense. This is very similar to that. Eckert had a whole bunch of practices that he did when writing history and biography. And I approve of all of them. I wish more biographers did them. The only reason that they don't is because it takes a huge amount of literary ability to be able to do it responsibly. And that approach can be summed up in that if he was looking at a primary document that described a discussion between two figures, he would make it a discussion. He would turn it into quotations and he said, she said. No violence there at all. He's reporting in his notes where he's getting all this information. That plus the vivid descriptions makes this read like almost no biography you will ever read. I wish that this author had written 100 more books than he did. He wrote a lot of books, and I love them all. I unabashedly love them all. This is a great biography, and it will show you all the might have beens with someone like Tecumseh. All the might have beens with a figure like him that are far more dramatic and standout than with a figure like Sitting Bull. With Tecumseh, you feel like you are reading about what he was, the leader of another nation, the leader of a nation who deserves to be visited in state, who certainly deserves to have your word kept. Maybe it's just the man. The man comes out in the book, though, very vividly. This next one is a squish. It's not finished yet, and it's a slog. Talk about Dostoevsky being a slog. This is just as bad. In fact, worse, because Dostoevsky never killed anything that was human, as far as I know. Or never intentionally, or never willfully, or wantonly, whereas this one, like Mao Zedong, is one of the greatest mass murderers in human history. This is Stephen Kotkin's biography of Stalin. I just took the picture from Volume 2. There's also Volume 1. They're doorstops. They're 1,200 pages each. And it is brilliant. It is brilliantly done. The only downside is you're going to be spending all this time with an absolute psychopath. Just an absolute psychopath. Someone who loved to kill people. And did so from his earliest opportunity. And once he controlled a police state, those numbers became, well, uncountable. We don't actually know how many people Stalin killed. Kotkin doesn't draw a blind eye to any of that, but he covers a lot of other stuff too. He covers a lot of politics. And Stalin during the war. Of course, this is, you can tell from the subtitle here, that's what this is about. First-rate biography. You can't always like the subject. Then we have Victoria Wilson. This is a huge book. I don't know that the follow-up to this has ever come out. This is her gigantic biography of the great actress Barbara Stanwyck. Warts and all. And huge amount of detail. Oh my God, this is a huge book. It's like 1,000 pages long. But I was enraptured all along. In fact, one of the parts of this book that I found most interesting was the part I thought I'd find least interesting, which was the part of Barbara Stanwyck's life before she became Barbara Stanwyck. I knew a little bit about all the studio stuff and the fights and the quiet acknowledgement of how good a job she could do on the screen reliably time after time, but I didn't know anything about her pre-Hollywood days, and that all of that is covered with such immense energy. I hope there's going to be another volume. This one just goes to 1940. I hope there's going to be another volume. If there is one, I missed it. Then this is an oldie but a goodie. This is Jackson Benson. This is his book on John Steinbeck. I had to include this. The Adventures of John Steinbeck, writer. It's a big thing, another fat doorstep of a book, but again, I don't know exactly where I stand with the writings of Steinbeck. I go from quasi-liking them to not liking anything. I've never loved. But what a book this is. Regardless of what you think of the man's writing, what a book this is. Just incredibly good. Incredibly. Like a couple of other... Hey, baby. How you doing? Mr. Baby. Like a couple of other books that we've seen on this list so far, the Steinbeck book, you really get the impression that the author is present in every detail, not phoning anything in. I love that feeling. Then a little bit of a strange book here. I had to include it because it's really memorable. This is Angus Wilson, who has a long list. It's just boring, you baby. A long list of writings to his name. But he wrote a biography of Rudyard Kipling. Kipling has had many biographies as well. But this is the strange ride of Rudyard Kipling. A call out to a title of one of Kipling's famous stories. And it's great. It's hallucinogenic at parts, but it's great. Really, I think if you're going to get just one Kipling biography, I really think this should be it. Because it's terrific. Wish that I could find it with this cover. I grabbed this off the internet. I've never seen that cover. That would be great. Then another great figure, another interesting, fascinating figure. This is Leo Damrosch's biography of Jonathan Swift. The paperback is very well blurbed if you're ever in the mood to find the paperback of this. But this is, as you can tell from the subtitle, this is everything. This is not just Swift and the writings. Certainly, if you know anything about this figure, you'll know Gulliver's Travels and maybe A Modest Proposal. But there's so much more. to Dean Swift than this, so much more. And Damrosch covers it all with a wonderful, chatty narrative tone. The narrative tone really will keep you reading here. It's just delightful. Okay, then we have another squish. This is A Political Life. A little bit of a polarizing figure, perhaps a lot of a polarizing figure, but I wanted to include it because it's so well written. It is so eloquent. Oh, it's just so eloquent. Every turn of phrase has been worked to cut glass, regardless of the hideousness of a lot of what it's describing. This is Charles Moore's multi-volume biography of Margaret Thatcher. This is I just have a picture here of the final volume herself alone, but I recommend the whole series. I don't think there's ever been a one-volume abridgment. I'm not sure about that. It might not have come out in this country if there was one. But just for the prose alone, this is worth reading. But it is also really shrewd, really insightful on the explosive politics of the day this figure is a lightning rod for all of it. Thatcher's had a lot of books written about her, a lot of books written by her, but or allegedly by her with this guy's help. But the volumes of the Moore biography they're a wonderful reading experience, regardless of how irritating you will find the subject. Then we'll go back a little ways. This is Juan Williams, and this is his biography of Thurgood Marshall. So we have another jurisprudential biography of a great, towering figure who, if you're an American, you live in Marshall's world, whether you know it or not. You might not know how much he did, what a gigantic figure he was, how brave he was. But Williams does a fantastic job of conveying it all, and doesn't forget the man. It's so easy in justice biographies like this to forget the man. Every once in a while, someone will remember. There have been a number of biographies, for instance, of Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., and they almost always forget the man. Same to say, but they almost always do. This one doesn't. I think we've got one more on the list that doesn't as well. And then this next one is something I've recommended on this channel before many times. This is Ron Power's biography of Mark Twain. Eloquent, insightful, sometimes funny, but definitely not trying to compete with Twain when it comes to funny, and also sad when it needs to be sad in the way that only the life of a humorist can be. Twain tried to be quirky and quippy whenever he was in public or when he was in semi-public, but he was more aware of the tragedy of the world than most people. Humorists tend to have to be. So, and Powers gets that. He's really good on the psychology of Twain. I hate to say that, but because that would raise red flags with you. It does with me, but he's really good at it. Really, you'll see what I mean when you start to read it. You'll definitely get a sense of Twain the man. Then, maybe are you just sitting back there? You're just sitting back there staring at me. Why? Why? Huh? What's the matter? You're just sitting here staring at me. You tired of hearing me talk? Stop talking. Let's just push on, shall we? My critic notwithstanding. This next one is a Stephen Neiffe and Gregory Jackson Smith. This is their biography of Vincent van Gogh. Big, big thing that is really good. Really, I was worried when I was reading it. Van Gogh biographies tend to go into way too much detail on who the model was or where the garden really was or what about this bridge, that sort of thing. You tend to get way too many details about that sort of thing. And these authors keep this under perfect control. And this is a famously tortured individual, and they managed to balance that out. They managed to balance that out with humanity on almost every chapter of this book. You get a Van Gogh who laughs here and overeats and who kisses people on the mouth. This is good. It's good to get a biography like that. I'm not a huge fan of Van Gogh's work. I don't think he's a fraud like Jackson or like Pollock or Picasso. I don't think he's a fraud. Like we saw the multi-volume squish biography of Picasso earlier in this video. But I'm not a huge fan, but I'm a huge fan of this book. I just love it. It's a little bit tricky to find a good condition used copy because the publisher decided to. It was a very clever decision. They gave the book a naked hardcover illustration. They put a portrait of Van Gogh on the naked hardcover, and then they gave the dust jacket is a thin gauze of gray, that when you overlay it on that makes the impressionistic look, the indistinct impressionistic look. Unfortunately, that thin gauze of gray is delicate, so it tends to be ripped apart, and the book doesn't survive well in used books. Okay, this next one is a squish, a very famous example of squished volumes. This is James Thomas Flexner, wrote a multi-volume biography of George Washington that is great. But then he condensed it into a one-volume work called The Indispensable Man, and that sold better than the individual volumes did. That George Washington, The Indispensable Man, is a really good one-volume abridgment of this guy's work. If you're reading this as a biography of Washington, this is really, really good. Way too hagiographic, but that's hard to avoid. If you're reading this and you like the author's tone, how good he is, how sharp he is, well, you can get the unabridged volumes and read a whole lot more of him. He just thought a one-volume abridgment was good, was necessary. Then we have another squish. This is never done into a one-volume, I don't think. I hope it never is. The individual volumes are immensely wonderful. They are immensely charismatic. So I recommend all of them on the subject. Simon Callow, the great actor, decided to write a multi-volume biography of Orson Welles, and it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. This is just one volume. I think there's one before this and one after this, maybe two after this. They are all just endlessly readable. Now, they're helped in that regard by their subject matter, because Welles was fascinating. Never opened his mouth without being fascinating. But Simon Callow also, he doesn't just phone this in. This is legitimate biography. He digs in to what was going on at the various studios and the money-raising efforts that dogged Welles for his whole life. What was going on there? Who was who, and who says what? And was Welles always in the right, or never in the right, or what? Wonderfully inquisitive, in other words, all of these volumes, but also tremendously written. I don't believe that a biography like this about Welles could be written by anyone other than a writer and director. A scholar of Welles could have written a really good multi-volume life, but it wouldn't read like this. It wouldn't read like Callow is just patting the couch next to him and saying, "Let me tell you what I've learned about my profession." Right? They share a profession. I love it. Absolutely love it. I smile when I see them in used bookstores. Then we have Elizabeth Longford. This is another squish. She wrote a 2-volume biography of Wellington, of the Duke of Wellington. She's the third person or there have been 3 2-volume biographies of Wellington that I know of in relatively modern times. And the reason for that is because his life lends itself to that. He was first an exemplar and a military man, and then the man who beat Napoleon. And then he was an elected politician. So the two halves of his lives invite a 2-volume response. There was a more reason by Rory Moore that was quite good, but Elizabeth Longford's have the benefit of being more eloquent, better written. And they are The Years of the Sword and The Pillar of State, but I just chose 1 volume. I don't know if this maybe is a combined volume that she did. But the 2 volumes are worth getting on their own. If you find them, they're at used bookstores all the time. They're yard sales all the time, and they're quite good. Quite good. I could have put Elizabeth Longford on this list for a few different entries, but I chose her Wellington books, and I choose to consider them as 1 book. Then we have Hermione Lee. Hermione Lee could have been on this list 5 or 6 times. I chose her great big book on Edith Wharton, which I love, even though I love its predecessor as well. The previous great big book on Edith Wharton, and there were 2 others that I also really like. But this is rich and atmospheric. I wrote at great length about this once upon it when it first came out, and love it. I recently revisited it and just love it. So Edith Wharton is don't let the furs fool you. She's a very, very important American writer. And this covers all that. She wrote for her whole life, but this covers her personal life as well, which had a number of dark twists and turns that some biographers don't do full credit to. And Hermione Lee, of course, is great. Yeah, the irony, I think she's the greatest living biographer, the irony being that the one book of hers that I reviewed, I didn't like. But, well, into every life, a little rain must fall, so I'll just let it go. Oh, then this next one's a little bit older, but I really like it. This is Justin Kaplan's life of Walt Whitman. Really, really good. Whitman is a tricky subject because he's trying to hide from his biographers, at least as much as he's trying to show them things. And Kaplan knows that. So it's not a scandal-mongering biography, but you get the real man. I love it when biographers do that. There was a book called there was a book like that about Mark Twain, as well, Samuel Clemens and Mark Twain, that tried to do the same thing. The attempt on Whitman's part to hide from future biographers is not the same as Twain's attempt, but they're similar. And this does everything well except the poetry. I could wish for a better guide to the poetry. I think Kaplan knows that. Just judging by the tone that he takes towards the poetry in the book, I think he probably knows that. But, okay, we'll move on to, I swear, this will be, I think, my last jurisprudential biography. I'm pretty sure it will be. I don't know why there were so many this time around. This is Bruce Allen Murphy. He did a biography of Justice Douglas, William O. Douglas, called Wild Bill. Big, thick thing, really entertaining reading. Partly for reasons that Douglas himself would not have agreed with. Douglas was a prolific writer, a really good writer, wrote all the time, wrote for the popular press, not just about the law. He wrote about all sorts of things. I have a couple of his books in this room. And a lot of his legal decisions are really, really good. He would brush them over. His clerks would hand him stuff and he would brush it over in his inimitable literary style. There were a couple of problems with him as a subject for a biography, both of which are dealt with very frankly in this book in a way that I don't think he would have fully appreciated. I don't know that he ever knew about this book. I think he died before it came out. But one of the problems was that he was pretty corrupt. I know that the bar has been set with Supreme Court corruption. The bar has been set by Clarence Thomas so high that no one else can even see it. So it feels funny to talk about Supreme Court corruption when you've got Clarence Thomas alive and on the court, the most corrupt Supreme Court justice, not only in American history, but conceivable. So it's pretty tough to say that, but nevertheless it was true. But there was also a bigger obstacle when it came to Bill Douglas, and that was that he was a prolific and proficient liar. He lied a lot about a lot of things, even when he didn't need to. And multiple lies about the same thing. So this tracking him down, Murphy does a great job in this book doing that, and pays it justice. He isn't just hating Douglas for doing that. He doesn't go so far. I don't think anywhere in this book he goes so far as to use the dumb euphemism of Douglas being a fabulist. But there's definitely a note of affection that runs throughout here, and I appreciated that. Because this is a serious figure, an important figure in court history. But I believe that's our last sojourn on the U.S. Supreme Court. Sorry, I could have done that all day. I could have done judge and justice biographies all day. There was a huge number of them that I left out. But we'll move on. We'll move on to John Rule. This is his biography. This is another squisher. This is his biography of Kaiser Wilhelm II. This is done in multiple volumes, and they are brilliant. They are brilliant. As biography goes, you're going to be sick of Wilhelm in very little time. Before he gets out of his teens, you're going to want to be banging him over the head with a bedpan. And as you watch, as he gets, obviously, as these pages go on, it's clear that he's getting more and more mentally unhinged as time goes on. And that mental unhingement leads to World War I, which is, again, going to seem like small potatoes in very little time when we see what can really happen when a maniac leads a powerful nation. But it was pretty big for the time. And this biographer that is so easy to write off in cartoonish ways. And this biographer does not do that at all. This is, I won't say that it's quite the hands-on that I was talking about, where the biographer is present on every page, like the Steinbeck biography, or Darren McCullough for Thomas Cromwell, where the biographer is thinking about every little thing. I won't say that's true, but this is surprisingly invigorating reading. I don't know if there's been a one volume, but if you can, maybe if you have a university library, you could get the individual volumes. They're well worth reading. They're an undertaking, but they're well worth reading. We have another royal biography. This is Philip Ziegler. I could have put a number of his books on this list. I just chose one. It's the weirdest one. King William IV of England was a moron. An utterly flyweight, idiotic, syphilitic moron. A classic example of the wicked uncles. Exactly the sort of thing that you're just waiting to be swept entirely cleanly off the stage by Queen Victoria and the modern era. It would never have occurred to me in a million years that a biographer could actually make a good biography out of this figure, and Philip Ziegler does. His biography of William IV doesn't make any Andrew Roberts style claims about how William IV was actually a hidden genius. but he makes a substantial figure out of him and a fantastic reading experience. Oh my. And if you've read this guy's book on the Black Death will know he is a terrific reading experience. This is wonderful. Somehow, against all odds, it's wonderful. It shouldn't be. Then we can go to a translated work. This is Vivienne Forrester. This is A Little Life of Virginia Woolf that she did. This is no more than 150 pages, but brilliant. Brilliantly insightful. So those of you who go to your biographies wanting every last jot and tittle, what did you eat on Thursday, that sort of thing, you're not going to want this any more than you're going to want the Roy Blount biography of Robert E. Lee. You're not going to want this because this is not for that kind of biographical reader. I know I sympathize completely. I'm not saying either one is better. I tend to be the what did you eat last Thursday reader of biographies. I tend to want it all. If I'm going to get any of it, I want it all. Just because if I'm going in for the long haul, I'm interested in the subject. I also don't trust writers when they abridge heavily. I wonder what you're leaving out, and that distracts me from your book. But I never felt that way with this. This is beautifully done. Just beautifully done. So if you want a quick biography of Virginia, well, a lot of people do want quick biographies. You want a quick biography of her, you can't do better. And then I believe we're going to finish this up. I believe we're finishing up with this last book. This is Nancy Milford. Great biographer, very choosy biographer, very painstaking biographer. Takes a long time to write a book. And this is her biography of Zelda Fitzgerald. This won all kinds of awards. I don't remember. It doesn't say on this new cover. This was hugely successful. Everybody loved this. They loved learning about Zelda Fitzgerald and all the stuff they didn't know. Right? Again, if you don't know anything about Zelda Fitzgerald, then all you know is the crazy person who made F. Scott Fitzgerald's life so hard. There's a lot more to the subject than that, and Milford goes over it all. It's amazing, considering how famous F. Scott Fitzgerald was. It's amazing how much primary stuff is revealed in this book for the first time. How many people were just sitting around twiddling their thumbs waiting for a biographer to show up and ask them questions at the kitchen table. Milford did that. There's a huge amount of legwork involved in this book, a huge amount, but it reads beautifully. And I bet it will change the way you think of Zelda Fitzgerald. I bet it will. So there you go, believe it or not. that is a 100 biography recommendations video that was provoked in the purest, most manipulative way possible. Taunt me by saying, bitch, you can't do that. And show me a cute dog picture. That's all it took. Goodness gracious. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I could keep going. Oh my, I could keep going. But maybe we'll do a part 2. If you like this, we'll do a part 2. Send me more dog pictures. That ought to do it. I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.